Okay, so for right now, these posters are going to be utilized by the curriculum team, and what they're going to be doing is they're going to also be adding the cross-cutting concepts. So they are going to be piloting with some resources, having the essential question at the top, looking at the practices, the why behind the practices, as well as having those cross-cutting concepts. And then they're going to be giving feedback back about how useful it was, how does it work within the classroom, in other words. And so we just wanted to give you that background knowledge that this is what the team's doing. So you walk in their classroom and get kind of an idea.
And the idea is that you would never have all 8 practice posters up at once, because in a unit you're maybe only focusing on 1 or 2 practices. So you would have those posters up to say, here's what we're focusing on. And a reminder that the key is you are explicitly teaching the practices and assessing the practices alongside the content with this new curriculum.
Okay, so
the curriculum team over the summer created K-12 aligned rubrics, or K-8 I should say, 9-12 is working on this coming summer, on how would we actually assess students on these practices.
So what we wanted to do is kind of share the journey, because I think it's important for you to know, how did these come about? When you're not on the curriculum team, it's always kind of a mystery. So we like to give you some background knowledge. So the first piece is to really honor what we've already done. So we've adopted new standards. We've built background knowledge around those standards. We've created I can statements, K-8, and 9-12 is now coming on board. And then we've researched and started piloting some resources. That's a lot in 1 year. We want to show where we're going. We're building rubrics currently around those standards. We're piloting resources still against the performance expectations, because we realized we need to know what the end looks like in order to pick a good resource. And then where we're going is that idea that we all have a common understanding about what quality looks like. Again, so when a student is assessed in any classroom, any building, that assessment would look similar as far as quality. Your sense of quality would look the same as another person's sense of quality, as well as K-12 alignment. So this is the hard part. So where did it come from? So Kathy and I have been grappling with the idea of what these rubrics should look like. And so after we worked with the K2 team over one of our in-service days last year, was that in March? Mm-hmm. In March, we were pretty excited. We left this room like, Hamilton has this. K2 totally got it. So we drafted those rubrics for planning and carrying out investigations, and we excitedly met with Tony Frontier. We were like, yes, we got this. And Tony, he was like, you sort of have it, not totally. And so we went into a sense of denial. So we started emailing back and forth and saying, well, this is what we have, this is why we think it, prove why we shouldn't think this. So what he did is he sent us back a bunch of examples of rubrics from other districts to kind of help guide us. So we revised our rubrics based on what Tony's feedback gave us, and we submitted it to Tony. Tony responded, and they weren't right. And we couldn't figure it out, because we're like, wait a second, we just did what you asked us to do. You gave us these examples of rubrics, we changed where we were to this, the example, and he still was like, it's not right. At this point, Kathy and I had put in several hours of going back and forth, pushing back, and like taking it to Katie saying, what do you think about this? And so when he told us it's still not right, we got kind of mad.
And at that point, we called it newish feedback, because what he sent back to us looked almost like the original rubrics.
Yeah.
So we're like, where is he going with this? Knowing that in a week, we had K-5 science coming in to do the rest of the rubrics.
Yeah, so we were pretty much freaking out at this moment. Yeah. Yep. And so Tony got back to us, and now we started to bargain. And so we started to say, well, I mean, what is like pretty good then? Like we were kind of at the point like maybe Hamilton is just going to have their own spin on it. So what if we did it this way? So we started kind of bargaining back and forth, realizing we may have to compromise. And so we again revised our rubrics to reflect the newest feedback that he gave us. And then we agreed to meet with Tony on June 8th. So June 8th was like, what, the last day of school. And so we met with them, or we prepared to meet with them, and we were kind of depressed. I have to tell you, we went into the district conference room completely defeated. We were ready to just be like, I don't know, whatever, just give it a
Sounds
shot.
like you, Tony.
And we also invited Katie and Dr. Milky to be part of the conversation because we did get to that bargaining phase where we're like, you know, we might have to just say this is what it is. And what was awesome was while we were in that room, we actually came to really, what we consider really, really good rubrics. So we want to take you through kind of what we missed. Every time Tony looked at our rubrics, he knew in 5 seconds what we missed. So that's what we're going to take you through. It's important for you guys to kind of see that as well.
Okay, so the number one thing he said is we didn't use the solo taxonomy. So we want to, some of you have seen this video before, it's 2 minutes. We just want to repeat or review what the solo taxonomy is about because it plays a huge role in the rubrics that were created. We're not going to use sound because the background music is important.
It's like carnival sound and it's so annoying. So you'll get the idea.
It's kind of weird without the sound.
Turn on. You guys turn on the iPad.
Yeah, it's back there. It feels like it's in the clouds or something.
Okay, so we took those science and engineering practices, which is where we've done a lot of our focus. And here's what Tony said to us, and he said, not all parts of a standard are created equal. And that's the key part we missed.
Every time.
Every time. So what he was saying is that this is the whole standard for planning and carrying out investigations at the K2 level. And he's like, you can't tell me. So here's what we did.
This is what we did, yeah.
We took all of this and we said, well, that's proficient then. You're hitting the standard, it's proficient, and we put it in level 3. And he's like, so you're telling me planning an investigation is the same level of cognitive demand as carrying out an investigation? And I'm like, oh. He's like, planning an investigation is far harder than just following the directions and carrying out the investigation. So he said you have to take this and divide it by cognitive demand first, so you can start figuring out where your levels are on your rubric. So this is what we ended up doing for K2 to start. Planning an investigation is more of a level 4 cognitive demand on our 1, 2, 3, 4 rubric. For a kid to plan it from beginning to end on their own takes a lot of cognitive thinking and understanding. Conducting an investigation, on the other hand, is more of a level 2. Producing data to serve as the basis for evidence to answer a question, more level 3, because you need to use it to serve as evidence. Evaluating different ways of observing and or measuring a phenomenon to determine which can answer a question. That evaluation piece puts it in the level 4 category. Making observations or measurements, level 2, you're just listing them or recording them. And then the last 2 sections are actually for, data that can be used to make comparisons is a level 2. And then determine if it solves a problem or meets a goal would be more of a level 3. And then making predictions based on prior experiences, so applying it to another field or transferring it to another category would put it in a level 4. So he said, once you do this, now you have a start of how to create your rubrics. And that's the key point we were missing.
Right. So really what happened was that's why he could notice it in 2 seconds. So we just wanted to share with you kind of what happened to our thinking. So we met with Tony and then we wrote on this board and we were like, oh, we got it. So it's not just about the standard. If we take the standard and we divide it into levels of cognitive demand, then teachers will actually know where to focus their time and their effort, so that they can provide feedback and also give multiple opportunities for all students to reach those high levels of cognitive demand.
So when I thought back to when I taught 6th grade science, how often did I allow students to get to a level 4? We almost never planned investigations from scratch. I always had them carrying them out. Or they did the observations. They weren't always making predictions. So the first thought is, where do I need to concentrate my teaching and scaffold learning so students can get to a level 4? And then the second is, how do I then use that information to assess them?
Right, so when we're looking at assessments, if we write rubrics that inform student learning, then students and teachers will know what quality looks like and where they fall in relation to that. So everybody has opportunities to get the highest level of cognitive demand. So that for us was that aha, and that's how we came to the group to write the rubrics, is we started by looking at each standard and dividing them up by cognitive demand, and then creating the rubric from that.
So assessment initiative in the district, our goal is that K-12 alignment. We want to have common language, so we want to have common rubrics that we're using in all buildings at all grade levels. So the first thing we did is we divided planning and carrying out investigations into 2 rubrics, because sometimes you plan investigations and sometimes you just conduct them. So it depends on what rubric you want to focus on for your unit. So this is the K2 and 3-5 version of planning investigations. We want to give you a minute to look at it and let us know what you notice and what are your thoughts. Thoughts looking at these rubrics?
In rubrics that I've used, this is what I try to do, is try to be a little bit more general, so it can apply to as much as possible.
That's what we did.
Yeah,
That's
and
what I
that's the
like
key,
about
that
it.
they're gonna have multiple chances throughout the year to use this rubric, no matter what unit you're teaching. Yeah. Anything else?
Something that I was thinking about, I teach 3rd grade, And right now we're doing the solar system. So I think like you were saying with your science, I think it really depends on the topic of study. I don't have my kids carrying out investigations unless we're doing whatever. So, you know, I'm looking at habitats. Well, unless we brought something in or whatever. I'm thinking it's going to be the topics are going to be very important. Light, yes, for sure. But out of those three, I'm looking at light being one of them. That would be.
Right, so you're only gonna hit certain practices and certain units depending on how it fits, absolutely.
Absolutely, yeah.
You would never hit all 8 practices in a unit. Probably hit 1 or 2, maybe 3. Anything else that you noticed? Do you like the ands? Not sure yet, okay. Everyone else loves the and. They think that it's a growth model and that it's not as wordy that. It just shows like here's how you have to get level 2 before you can get to level 3. And you have to hit level 3 before you can get to level 4 as you go.
We're good.
Okay. All right, so these rubrics, the goal this year is that they're not perfect yet. We're going to try them out this year to give feedback and say what do we need to fix, what made sense, do we need to add more qualifying information to it. Erin and Julie had asked, did everyone else get through the same training? They did in the summer, and the principals in the district got the same exact presentation you're getting tonight as well. So the principals have gone through this exact same training, so they understand where these rubrics came from and what this next part of the process is about. So we're switching gears a little bit, but not fully.
The other piece about the rubrics is that we are using them exactly the way they are. So we don't want you to make any changes. We want everyone using the same ones, so when we're getting feedback back from you, we know what we're changing.
Ultimate goal, you're going to try 1 or 2 of these rubrics this year with your science companion. So not all 8 in any way, just 1 or 2 of them to see how they work.
Okay, so from rubrics, we're moving to the way that we want to put standards and assessment at the forefront as a district. So I want you to do is I want you to think about, so everyone brought a unit, right? Think about how do you go about planning a unit of study. Just take a couple seconds in your head and think, okay, what is my process for actually planning a unit? Just in your head.
We had Post-its in the summer, so we
Yeah,
jotted
I
down,
know.
but we forgot. Everyone's kind of got in their head, like, this is kind of what I do first, second, third.
Okay, so I'm going to be a little vulnerable right now and talk about how I went about planning my unit of study. I was a high school teacher, high school English teacher, and so every year I taught the unit To Kill a Mockingbird. So it's a book and not really a unit, but it was a good one. I looked forward to it every year. The last pages of the book are the most beautiful literary pages of all time. I loved reading it aloud. I loved crying. And so what I would do is like, okay, we're reading To Kill a Mockingbird. I thought about the standards, so I knew I was going to do characters because we have to know the characters. We're going to talk about the setting. We need to know the setting, how the plot elements work together as we're going through reading it chapter by chapter, showing our understanding. And then towards the end, I started writing my test. So my tests all looked the same. So they started with a character matching, so character name, who are they? And then it went on to like a quote from a character, and the kids had to tell me, the significance of the quote. And then there would be an essay, whatever I decided was the theme. Sometimes I decided at the beginning, or sometimes something really great came up as we were going, and be like, oh, that's even better. And the kids would take the test. We'd read the book. They'd take the test. And what I would do is I would take Brittany's test and I'd put it to the top. And I would read Brittany's first because Brittany always got an A+. I can just tell you that. She's one of those students that you're like, holy cow, how do you write like this? So she always got the characters right. I mean, that was easy. And the quote explanations, she got all the points. And then for the essay, I'd read hers, and then that was kind of how I decided what all the rest should sound like. And then I'd correct the rest of the tests. So I'd have those B+ kids come up to me and be like, Mrs. Sankey, how do I get like an A? Honestly, I told her, well, you can explain a little bit more here. Maybe on Tuesday she'll listen to what theme we were talking about. But the reality of the answer was, you'll need to talk to Brittany before the test about how she's going to answer that question because she gets all the points, and that's kind of how I evaluate the rest of you. Now, did I actually think that way? No, but when I'm reflecting back, that's actually kind of the truth of it, is I kind of waited to figure out what quality looked like, and then kind of graded everybody off of that. So when we're talking about putting standards and assessment at the forefront, what we're talking about is maybe putting that in a different place. So that was kind of a vulnerable place for me, I'll tell you that. So at your tables, just kind of talk about, if you're vulnerable enough, and I should tell you, like, I was a good teacher. Like, this was good stuff. Okay, who can relate? Has your planning ever felt like this? Like, you're like, gosh, I guess I didn't know where I was going to end up until I got there. Go ahead, just quickly talk at your tables.
Design, not the teacher's style or your interests. Like, that was a really fun teacher, they built really great relationships. Made the learning effective or ineffective. So Patty has said she was so engaging that kids learned because she was just engaging. And the fun teacher. So don't think about the teacher's personality. Think
Try to
about what
avoid
was
the
the
teacher.
design of the learning that made it so effective or ineffective. Would anyone like to share their experience? Great experience or poor experience of learning? No one?
So Erin and I learned how to cross-country ski, and we had a really great teacher who was an expert, and he made it in over 1 hour.
Hour and a half, something like that.
Small victories along the way to a bigger goal. And you could see the bigger goal, and you stayed interested because everything built upon those smaller successes and failures to get to being able to glide and not stick along the way.
Awesome. Okay. Anyone else? We will make you. You don't have to.
Well,
All right.
I was just saying that my favorite thing is to show my learning through a project. So we were kind of discussing the different learning at this table, like that would not be what some of the people at the table here would like. But that's how I like to show, or,
Right.
show what I learned.
Did it feel more hands-on or authentic that way too?
Yes.
Is that why? Okay. Yeah.
But others would prefer a text.
Right?
All right, so two researchers, McTighe and Wiggins, did some surveys of the best learning designs around K-16 faculty throughout the United States. It's on the back of your blue sheet. So this is what they're saying, according to these surveys, makes great learning and well-designed learning. So I'm going to give you a set to look at that and see if there's things you see that you're like, oh yeah, that's why I thought that learning was so effective, or oh, that's what was missing and why it was such a poor experience for me.
So as a district, when Tony came in, he had given us a charge to look at our classroom through the eyes of a learner. And so he said, we have a way to go. So some of us started teaching and thinking coverage is actually the key, where you're just focusing on the quantity of information. Some people think like an activity designer. They're thinking about all of the products that happen. And what we were talking about last year was building our background knowledge so we can all be thinking like a facilitator of understanding, which is where we're giving multiple opportunities for students to show their understanding and show their proficiency. And so when we're thinking about how we plan and when we're thinking about those best teachers, those teachers that have lessons that work, that help us learn and we know what the end goal is, what we're really doing is showing that we understand by design. And so that is what the district is looking at, and that is taking those standards and the assessments and putting them at the forefront using the template of understanding by design. So when we're looking at this quote really struck Kathy and I as something that really gets to where we're going. To begin with the end in mind means to start with a clear understanding of your destination. It means to know where you're going so that you better understand where you are now, so that the steps you take are always in the right direction. Understanding by design has a lot of synonyms. It's sometimes called UBD, and it's sometimes called backward design. You'll most often hear it called backward design.
How many of you are familiar with this process or heard of it before? So the entire district is going this route through assessment team this year to focus on the backward design process. K-8 teachers in the district are focusing on it through science because that's where we're at in the curriculum cycle. So what is backward design, or UBD? It's purposeful planning by starting at the end and working backward. It's about clarifying the learning you seek or the desired learning results. It's structured to allow us to determine the evidence needed to show proficiency in advance before we even teach any lessons. And it's a way to plan purposeful learning activities and experiences clearly aligned to the established goals. It's not a new concept. However, I would argue that for many of us it is. It came out around 2003. So by the time it got to colleges of teaching and learning, it probably wasn't until 2007, 2008. So if you haven't gone to school since then, you probably haven't been trained in the backward design process. And that's not a bad thing, it's newer probably to a lot of us. And it's also not a rigid sequence, although it might feel that way right now, because we're gonna kind of go through it in a systematic way so we understand the process of backward design. So, McTighe and Wiggins have an article that explains why backward is best and what the research is to support it. And you have it at your
It's
table.
tabled at your tables.
So we're going to give you about 5 to 7 minutes to take a look at that, and then we're going to ask you to think about what is one aha moment for you, or something that is a great reminder for you. Maybe you already knew it, but it was like, oh yeah, that's a great reminder. Okay, take a moment at your table and talk about either your ahas or good reminders, and then we're going to ask each table to share one aha or reminder. Thanks, guys. Go ahead.
I guess right on the first page, what struck us is kind of the mindset of the teacher. Focused on what am I going to teach, what am I going to teach, what am I going to teach, and the thought of what are they going to learn sometimes doesn't even enter our heads because we're so focused on, okay, what are we going to teach?
And you know those kids are going to be in front of you within, an hour or a few minutes. So it's kind of that immediacy, and that helps you start thinking activities before the learning.
Right.
How about you guys?
I think that we're just kind of talking about that this is very logical. I think it's best practice. Right. So it might have new names. We talk about backward design now, but it's something that I think we've been doing. Maybe we have a district-wide, the same rubrics for everybody, kind of come through a rubric, but it's a logical way to teach and a logical way to design instruction. So it's not something that's new.
Yeah, it makes sense when we look at it. How about this table?
The part about, knowing purpose is so important. What is that end goal? And the stuff moving toward it. Being minds on. So just your minds on. Yeah.
What about you guys?
I think it reminds us of conversations we started having when the newest standards came out a few years back. When we really started looking at, let's go deeper and not so wide. So it brings us back to those kind of conversations.
Absolutely.
What's most important to cover and what do I need to focus on, and can I cut out all of the other stuff? And that's kind of the key with this process. So, they mentioned in the article there's 3 stages to it. You first want to identify your desired results of learning. So what are your standards that you need to hit? Then you want to determine acceptable evidence of learning. How will I assess students on those standards? And it's the last page of your packet has these 3 stages listed as well. So how will I know if they've gotten there? What evidence would I accept to say, yes, they hit that target? And then stage 3 is when we then say, okay, now what are my lessons going to look like? What activities am I going to do with students? How am I going to model or scaffold instruction to help them do well on those standards and show proficiency in them? So our goal in the next hour is to have us go through this process and get through stage 1 and 2, so that next Friday when we go to the in-service on October 5th, you can work on stage 3. So you could work together with someone at the same grade level if you want and do the same unit together and collaborate, or you can work on one on your own. That's completely up to you. And the thought is you are going to be using a science companion unit that you're going to be teaching in the future, sometime probably before the end of second quarter. You'll have at least started that unit. And that you want to incorporate one NGSS practice in that unit somehow. Does that make sense? So somehow trying out planning investigations through the NGSS lens, asking questions, whatever you want to choose is fine, so that you can try using one of those rubrics with the unit. So we can get feedback from you by the end of the year on it. Okay, so stage 1 is all about the desired end result. What standards?
Okay. All right, so what we did was we like to start with a model and then take you through that. So if I look at something that's planned out like what we have up here. So it's my topic, life science, we're talking about habitats. And so I have this activity, I have all my activities listed. I'm going to talk about what is a habitat. We're going to study polar regions. We're going to study animals or plants in the polar regions, create a report or a poster. We're going to study those desert regions. Then we're going to create a wanted poster for animals to live in the desert region. We're going to study woodland regions, take a hike around Sussex forest areas or maybe the nature center on a field trip and note in our journals what that habitat's like, what animals are there. We're going to study the ocean regions and then create a classroom ocean. So my assessments are going to be polar region report, a desert wanted poster, the journal notes on the woodland regions, my classroom ocean exhibit, and then an end of the unit test. So I have a thread talking about habitats. We're going to take this unit and redesign it using the backward design process. That's the plan. So we have to start at standards. So we want to identify our desired learning results first in stage 1. So what we're going to have you do is this is a shortened URL that you can type in that will bring up a template for our UVD unit. The whole district is using a template similar to this. We've adjusted it slightly to fit science by putting in like science engineering is needed. So we're going to have you type that in and bring it up. If you are going to collaborate with someone, then have one person bring it up and then share your template to that person so you guys are working on the same document. So we'll give you a moment to do that. Once they make a copy. So the template you bring up, you're going to file, make a copy because it's view only. And then I would rename it to the name of the unit you're thinking you'll focus on, Science Companion, whether it's watery earth or human body, whatever it is. And then, like we said, share it to someone you might be collaborating with if you want to. All right, so like Patty said, we're going to model it first, and then we're going to give you a chance to work on a portion of stage 1. So at your table, you have a paper copy of this model. So if the print is too hard to see up here, you've got an example of a completed unit over here. Okay, so in stage 1, we want to think standards. There's 2 types of standards. There's practice standards and there's content standards. In your backward design packet, we explain the difference between the 2. And that's going to be a major focus in our district over the next couple of years, is knowing the difference between the practice and content standards. So I'll give you a moment to look at that.
Okay, so the gist of it is a practice standard is something you hit all the time no matter what content you're teaching. Whether you're teaching human body or earth, you're gonna hit practice standards because it's how you think about, how you read, write, and think in that discipline. So in science, it's those 8 practice standards on the pink sheet you have in front of you. Those are our practices. No matter what I'm learning, as a scientist or engineer, I ask questions. I engage in arguments. I construct explanations. I plan and carry out investigations. Does that make sense? Those are our practice standards. Your content standards are, okay, well, what am I going to teach them? What are we learning about? Are we learning about life fields? Are we learning about the human body? So what we did is we took our habitats unit and we looked back at our standards. Went backwards. And we said, okay, we're going to try the develop and use models engineering practice. You get to choose what practice you want to focus on with your science companion unit and pick one. Pick one. Don't focus on 3 or 4. The goal is that you want to try to use one of these rubrics with your science companion unit and try to teach that practice a little bit. Teach some strategies around it, help them get feedback on it throughout. Then when I looked at my standards, I said plants depend on water and light to grow is a content standard. Plants depend on animals for pollination or to move their seeds around. And there are many different kinds of living things in any area, and they exist in different places on land and in water. So then it makes sense the difference between the two. Here's the key for you guys. The science content standards from Science Companion are based on like 1997 science standards. We don't want you going to the 1997 science standards. So the thought is, pick one of the science and engineering practices that you think will fit with your unit, and then just list a couple of phrases. What content am I hitting in this unit? So students understand the phases of the moon.
Right.
They understand, just list it kind of like this up here. So what we'd like you to do is just fill out those first 2 boxes of stage 1 right now. We'll give you about 5 or 6 minutes to do that. Okay guys, this is the key. You don't want to jump to the NGSS standards fully because they're much more in depth. We just want you using one practice standard this year with Science Companion.
Right.
So don't jump to what the content standards say in the NGSS because your units are different next year. Just think of what's one practice I really want to try focusing on through a Science Companion
Look at
unit.
how organ systems work together to keep the
Wow.
All right, we're going to pause for a second, even if you're not done with those first 2 boxes, and talk about the next 2 for those of you that are going to get in there. So, I'm just going to repeat, you have a line up here that says cross-cutting concepts and some science and engineering practices. You're ignoring the cross-cutting concepts right now because you haven't had the training on it yet. So just pick one science and engineering practice and then the content you plan to cover through your science companion unit. The next part you do is you figure out your enduring understandings, meaning if kids get the standard of developing and using models, what will they understand? What will they get out of it? And those are considered overarching enduring understandings, so they go right above each other. You also have your topical understandings. If kids get this content, what do I really need them to understand from it? Like, do I really need them to understand the polar habitat and the desert regions and the woodland regions? What is the crux of what they're learning, this big thing that they need to come away from? So enduring understandings, on your pink packet, there are examples of them for each of the practice standards. So you can look and see an example.
With the idea, what you'll notice is we use at the beginning of overarching understandings, scientists use. Because that helped us back up and say, okay, if I'm looking at overarching, enduring understanding, I want kids to understand that scientists use models for what reason?
So in this case, we want to use models to represent a system and support explanations. That's why we use it. So we don't want them just creating models for the sake of creating models. We now need kids to understand why do we have models in the science discipline. That's my enduring understanding. You can literally go from your practice standard and look at the examples in the pink packet and pick one of those and paste it in. Or if you want to try to reword it differently, you can. But think about what do I need them to get from this practice standard during this unit. And then for the content standard, you need to synthesize that. So you're going to say, okay, if this is what I'm going to teach them, what do they really need to get out of this by the end? If I think they've totally got this. I mean, they need to understand that living things, plants and animals, depend on each other and their environment for survival. That's the crux of this unit. So if they get this, they've gotten all that. Does that make sense? So on the last page of the pink packet, there's 2 examples of how you can take some content information and synthesize it to be just an enduring understanding, a basic statement of what do they need really to get from this. So we'd like you to try that part next. What are your enduring understandings? One for a practice and one for the content.
How will you know we know?
Yeah.
All right, we're gonna move on here, and then for the next part, let us explain it, and then if you need to go back and finish some of these parts, you can.
Okay, so we are still in stage 1. So we are still looking at identified desired results. So we got everything synthesized into basically 2 pieces, right? But then what we want to do is now look and say, okay, so I need to give the kids multiple opportunities to practice these skills before I can summatively assess what they're doing. And so we ask 2 questions. So from the standards, it is important to know and to be able to do what? So what will my students be doing that shows that they understand, let's say if I picked modeling, modeling. And then the next piece would be, but what's worth being familiar with? Because there's those pieces that these are good to know, they're nice to know, but I'm not going to assess them. It's just good to know this information. It might be examples to support their understanding. It might be specific terms or specific names of things. So, do we have our example?
We do. So think about it this way. I need kids for my unit to understand that models are used to represent systems, that
Yep.
scientists use them, and I need them to understand that plants and animals depend on each other and their environment to survive. What are all the little building block pieces that are going to help them get to those enduring understandings?
This is just flip-flopped. So if we go to the bottom then, it's important to know and be able to choose an appropriate approach to modeling that matches that system. It's important for the kids to be able to use models to support what they're thinking, to convey what they're thinking. To understand the steps involved in answering questions about the natural world. To collect written evidence and make detailed observations to prepare for modeling, as well as explanations. Now the structures piece is your cross-cutting concept.
With the content. So they need to understand how plants work, they need to understand how animals work.
Understanding how the plants spread their seeds so they can reproduce, as well as understand different habitats and the kinds of plants and animals that live there. So these are the building blocks that will lead me to those enduring understandings. What we did is we highlighted the modeling piece to make sure that we've given multiple opportunities for
And that
that.
we're not just focusing on content. We have to explicitly teach to the practice and to the content.
So what's worth being familiar with? Well, we might want to show pictures of different types of plants and how they function, and give names of specific plants and animals in each region.
We wouldn't assess them on that, but that's going to help them build that understanding.
Right, build their background knowledge and understand what we're doing.
So this is where you think about what's all the little pieces I need to teach them so they can get to that understanding piece. Don't think activities like, I'm going to have them do this lab, I'm going to have them create this poster. Think, what knowledge do they need if they're going to get at that enduring understanding? So I'll give you some time to do that. Stage 1 takes the longest, just so you know. So if this feels kind of long, it's because stage 1 takes the longest processing and thinking.
For me, it helped to think about the fact that these are like kind of those formative checks.
Explain the difference between different materials.
That's the end of stage 1. Now you've kind of figured out, I know the standards I'm hitting. I know what the understandings are, like this is the key of what they really need to get. What's nice about that is you can now think about all the stuff that you no longer need to cover. Because you can pull some things out because you're like, well, that doesn't necessarily need to be taught to get to that enduring understanding or to get to that standard. It really helps focus your thinking about teaching and learning. And then you've thought about, okay, so what are all the building blocks I need so kids can get to those understandings? So the next stage is, how do I assess it? How do I know if they've got it?
So we're trying to figure out acceptable evidence. How do we know if the learners truly understand our enduring understandings?
Do they really understand the purpose of modeling in science? Do they really understand that plants and animals depend on each other for survival? Skip this slide. Okay, skipping. Okay. Is that good? Okay, so the 2 questions we ask ourselves in stage 2 is, do my assessment methods allow me to collect the appropriate evidence. Like, is what I'm asking them to do actually going to show understanding of that standard? And are the standards for my unit truly being assessed, or am I assessing other things? So again, it's that focusing on what do I really need to assess students on.
And so when we're thinking about assessment and we're taking those pieces that we had in step 1, what we're going to be doing is looking to say, there are some things that are just worth being familiar with. Those kind of things don't generally get assessed. There's things that we need to know and be able to do. Now, they're typically going to be assessed maybe through a paper pencil test, selected response, maybe a constructed response, but generally it's basic and it can go more complex. Now, the big idea and enduring understandings, that's what I want to know if the kids can do for our next unit, for the next grade level. What are they able to do? So that's going to be that performance task. Can they perform to show understanding? It might be an authentic project or an essay prompt. Your big ideas and enduring understandings end up being that generally your summative assessment.
What's nice about the science practices is it kind of gives you an idea of what your assessment is. If I'm developing and using models as my focus, then my assessment probably is going to be that they create a model to understand the content. If it's constructing explanations, my assessment is
Constructing an explanation, right.
Okay, so here is the key in the assessment part. Eventually you want to summatively assess them, but you need to give them multiple opportunities at practice so you can give them feedback before they get to that summative. So at the end I thought, okay, what's my authentic task? Well, my 2 enduring understandings, understanding models, and that plants and animals depend on each other, I need them to be able to create a model of a habitat. It could be any habitat, because I don't need them to know all of them, because I need them to just know how they work together. And so in that model, I'm going to have them draw the animals and plants, explain or write how the animals and plants are able to survive in that environment, and explain at least one way in which they depend on each other. That'll allow me to see, did they get the practice standard, and did they get the content standard, or the content understanding. Does that make sense? Okay, that's the authentic assessment task.
I know where they need to go, but where am I going to give them feedback and those multiple opportunities to model within this unit? So that's what goes to the right. So it says other evidence, multiple opportunities to practice and receive feedback. So that's where I'm thinking about, like, well, I'll have the kids draw a picture of a plant structure with labels and explain how it gets water and sunlight to survive. So that's a model. I'll have the kids do another picture. The next one says students read and take notes in their science notebooks. The next one, journal writing. Within the journal, they'll be modeling. Giving students a mystery animal with that they model, including the characteristics, features, needs, and have them explain what habitat that animal's in and why. Create a model for one plant or an animal to get feedback from the teacher. So I want to make sure that I have multiple opportunities for students to show me proficiency.
In modeling and practicing the content understanding. So all the models they do are about the content. They're going to see a theme in your unit now. They're going to be like, why are we doing so many models? Because that's what I'm assessing you on. Why are we learning about habitats? Because that's what I'm assessing you on. So that's the goal. We have these numbers here.
Yeah, so one of the things that we really learned in this process is that we weren't giving kids opportunities for the 4. When we're looking at cognitive demand.
On the rubric.
On the rubric. So when we're looking at the rubric, what we did is we put the number, so I'm saying that that first one would be a 2. If a student's able to do that, they're a 2 on the rubric. If I look at the second one, I'm giving opportunities for 2 and a 3. When I come down to journal writing, right here, I feel I'm giving the kids an opportunity to show me a 4 cognitive demand. So one of the things we realized was if we're going to assess at a 4 cognitive demand, we have to give opportunities for them to practice that over here too. So it's kind of,
we very much use that practice rubric to figure out what are the different things they can do at a level 1, 2, 3, 4. So that when they get to 4, they're ready to go. So when you're working on this section, you might want to pull up that rubric and be like, okay, so what are some things I can do that are level 2 things for that practice? What are some level 3 things? So the kids have those chances to build. Questions? We're going to give you about 5 minutes to start this and wrap up. So you may not finish, but I want you to start this for stage 2.
other evidence.
think we're not.
So stage 3 is what you're gonna focus on next Friday. So don't worry about stage 3. If you can get stage 2 done before next Friday, that would be awesome. If you stop here, just know next Friday you're gonna have to pick up at where you're at here with stage 2. So what we're asking for you to do is if you could share it to me, because then I can give you feedback before next Friday on it, of where you're at.
And the reason we give feedback is because John Hattie has proven through his research that feedback is the #1 thing you can do to help learning, right? And so we want to give kids multiple opportunities to do this. So therefore, we would also like multiple opportunities for you guys to do this. It's not evaluative. It's just to give you feedback.
So share it to me, and I will, before next Friday, have feedback for you so you have it next Friday.